So I'm asking Khalid, here you go. Richard, so it's such an honor for the International Center of Performance Studies to receive a household name in performance studies.
In my household.
Our honorable guest is none other than Richard Schechner. As one of the founders of performance studies, Schechner brushes his work in performance theory with innovative approaches, which he then applies to an ever wider spectrum of performances, including theater, play, rituals, dance, music, popular entertainments, sports, politics, performance in everyday life, to name but a few, in order for him to come to terms with performative behavior, not just as an object worthy of study, but also as an active artistic intellectual practice. Beside his academic duties, of course, at the university, as a university professor of performance studies, Schechner is also a theater director, a prolific author, and the editor of the most famous journal in the field, Drama Review, or TDR, and also the Enactment book series. As an academic, of course, his areas of research include, but not limited to, performance theory, experimental performance, Asian performance, intercultural performance, ritual play and performance, theories of directing, broad spectrum of performance and performance studies, globalization and performance, and of course, performance in everyday life. So of course, as a theater director also, he directed many productions, including, the very famous Dionysus in 69, and of course, Macbeth, Hamlet, Mother Carriage and Her Children, The Balcony, Three Sisters. Schechner has also directed in Asia and Africa, and as a writer, he authored numerous books on a myriad of topics. So you can imagine: Public Domain in 68, Environmental Theater in 73, Theater, Spaces and Environments in 75, Essays on Performance Theories 76, The End of Humanism in 81, From Ramlila and to the Avant-Garde, that's in 83, Between Theater and Anthropology in 85, to Performance Theory, which is also revised in 88, Performance Studies and Introduction in 2002, and that's the only book, by the way, that has been translated into Arabic so far. It should be noted also that as of 2018, his books have been translated into 18 languages, including Arabic. So he's recipient of many distinguished awards and fellowships, and it's indeed an immense honor for Performing Tangier to be hosting a scholar of the, I would say, the pedigree of Richard Schechner. We hope our audience will seize this golden opportunity to enjoy him, and of course, above all, to learn from his expertise and engage dialogically and dialectically with his insights. Maybe we have like 3 parts. Maybe the first part will be, we can start with the broad spectrum approach of performance studies and how you, Richard, you see the way it has traveled across languages and cultures. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, Khalid, thank you for hosting me. I'm very sorry, friends, that I'm not there in Tangier with you. Hopefully in a future time, I will be able to be there. It's great to see Erica. It's great to see some other people I know. And, I'm addressing, I think, 2 audiences. The close-in audience of performance theorists probably will know everything I'm about to say. And the broader audience, I hope there is a broader audience on YouTube or wherever, maybe some of that will be a little bit different. In the interest of being compact, I'm going to read a few pages because then I won't wander off. I know we don't have that much time. And I would like to have the opportunity to have the people who are participating interrogate me, engage me. I would engage you in some kind of dialogue rather than, just talking. And listening to what has just happened, the panel on English as a hegemonic language. Yes, that I have a lot to say about that. Let's say post-colonialism and the inheritance of colonialism are something that we are going to be living with for a long time. And if English can become a lingua franca, a kind of Latin, that would be excellent. However, I yearn for the time where we can speak each other's languages, and given that great fairy tale wish, what do you wish for? Aside from the meta wish of wishing for all my wishes to come true, if I specify them, my wish would be to speak all the world's languages. That would be as close as one can get to a kind of, pre-Babylonian world. However, performances are or can be models of utopian societies. The process of making performances, collaborative interactions and collective decisions leading to public displays is a positive social model. Workshops are ways to destroy ignorance. Rehearsals are ways to creatively relate to others, not by submerging or ignoring differences, but by exploring differences as the group devises a common way forward. And performances offer to the public the outcome of such active research. And I emphasize that the basic performance studies model is of a process. It is the process of research or workshop, the process of repetition towards a goal or rehearsals, and the process of displaying or sharing the results of the two earlier processes, which then feed back into future performances. Performance studies, the academic field I have helped to create and develop, is based on the axiom that we live in a performatized world where cultures are colliding with each other, hybridizing at a swift and increasing rate. And the prior panel shows that. This is a kind of hybrid language that is developing, means of using a certain semantic, perhaps English, but to incorporate into that semantic ways of thinking that are not native to English. English itself is a composite language of Anglo-Saxon, French, Celtic, etc., and so forth. All languages are hybrids, actually. These collisions are not always politically correct or pleasant, the ones among cultures. Populations and ideas are on the move, pushed by war, disease, as we know with COVID, ideologies, religions, famines, and hopes for a better life, government intervention, and global trade. These kind of collisions will only increase in the future. Whether we survive global warming is not really the question. The question is what and how we will be in the consequences of global warming. To what degree will there be, massive walls erected around the Mediterranean to stop all crossings from Africa, along the Rio Grande to stop all crossings from Latin America into the first world, as it were, from the fourth world or third world. And we will either survive with some degree of humanity, or we will enter a very devolved period. And human culture has had long stretches of devolvement as well as evolution. We shouldn't think of evolution as a one-way street. The so-called European Middle Ages had a lot of glorious things, but they had a lot of terrible things going on as well. And similar periods can be found throughout Asia, Africa, and so on. So it's not a given that we will come out on the bright side of this. nor is it a given that will come out on the a catastrophic side. It's still up in the air, though the recent meetings at CAP, whatever number it was, 21, 25, are not too encouraging, because the interests of business, the interests of government, the interest of business is profit, the interest of government is self-survival. These two interests clash with the interest of most people, which is some way to at first really acknowledge, and secondly take actual steps to mitigate what's coming at us. The COVID pandemic is a kind of dress rehearsal for what's to come. And it's not, as a theater director, I'm not overly hopeful about how we've handled this dress rehearsal. At any rate, the outcome of all these things, if there is an outcome instead of many, of all this circulation is neither clear nor certain. As I said, my head is a pessimist. My stomach, my gut is an optimist. Performances in the broad sense, in social life, in the arts, politics, business, medicine, science, and popular culture, mark identities, bend and remake time, adorn and reshape the body, tell stories, and provide peoples with the means to play with, rehearse, and remake the worlds we not merely inhabit, but are always already in the process of reconstructing. The development of performance as a category of theory, as well as a fact of behavior and action, makes it increasingly difficult to sustain the distinctions between appearance and facts, surfaces and depths, illusions and substances. We're seeing that today, and I can't give a second lecture, but it's a crisis of epistemology. In other words, how do we know what we know, and do we know what we know? For eons, people have believed in fictions, whether it's the fiction of a god like Jesus rising after 3 days, or the fiction of another god, Rama, incarnating himself every year as Ram Lila, or it's a much more minor fiction of Donald Trump saying he won the election. What's happened is that the categories of these fictions, which since the age of rationalism in the European Renaissance and 18th century, 17th, 18th century, there was a kind of ability to keep the fictions in the realm of art and religion. But now the fictions have become infiltrated entirely also the realms of politics. They were always lurking there, but they didn't have such purchase as they do now. So in a certain way, I don't feel personally responsible, but I think the theories of performance studies help engender the theories of postmodernism, this crisis of epistemology. How do you maintain a world where we don't have values given to us by divine will, and we don't have values given to us by Newtonian physics, quantum physics, and indeterminacy very much undermine the notion of inalienable values or truths. So that's a whole other discussion. Maybe we'll have it if we have time. The epistemological crisis that I think we're facing, along with the ecological crisis. So this, it's increasingly difficult to sustain distinctions between appearances and facts, surfaces and depths, illusions and substances. More than that, appearances are actualities. Appearances do drive actions. In modernity, what was behind, beneath, deep, and hidden were often the most real, but in postmodernity and whatever will come after, and I think we're now in the middle of this coming after, this epistemological crisis period, the Anthropocene and so on, whatever comes after, the relationship between the depths and the surfaces is fluid and dynamically convective. What was hidden is tossed upwards. What was skim is plunged into the interior. And it's not that even the notion of fake news suggests there's real news. In a certain sense, all news is fake news. All news is real news. And it's very, very hard to agree on the value system to guide our actions based on certain realities. Now, to understand the social consequences of the performance studies way of thinking, I want to turn to Jawaharlal Nehru, who in 1955, that's like 100 and X years ago, 75 years ago, in Bandung, Indonesia, told representatives of what came to be called the Third World, and now I'm quoting Nehru. I speak with the greatest respect of these great powers. He meant the USA and the USSR, because they are not only great in military might, but in development. I mean, that's what you were saying in the previous panel. So listen to Nehru here. Great not only in military might, but in development, in culture, in civilization. But I do submit that greatness sometimes brings false values, false standards. I submit that moral force counts, and the moral force of Asia and Africa must, in spite of the atomic and hydrogen bombs of Russia, the USA, or another country, they must count. Therefore are we, the countries of Asia and Africa, and he didn't see, but he could have talked about the global South in the New World, Latin America, and he could have talked about the Pacific Islands as well. So when he says Asia and Africa, he means all but the hegemonic West. The countries of Asia and Africa devoid of any positive position except being pro-communist or anti-communist, question mark. Has it come to this, Nehru says, that the leaders of thought who have given religions and all kinds of things to the world have to tag on to this kind of group or that and be hangers-on of this party or the other, carrying out their wishes and occasionally giving an idea? It is most degrading and humiliating to any self-respecting people or nation, unquote. This was Nehru in 1955. And it was the origin of the notion of the Third World as a counterpart to what was then a bipolar world. Today, the world is not bipolar as it was in Nehru's day. It is triangular, with tensions arising from conflicts among the claims of ideologized religion, 1, militarized politics, 2, and globalized economies, 3. Note, I'm not saying China and the US. I'm not giving it a geopolitical basis as such. I'm talking about ideologized religion, whether it's Hindutva in India or certain kinds of jihad in the radical Arab world, or American racism, which is founded on a certain misinterpretation of Christianity, ideologized religion, militarized politics, as we see in Europe and elsewhere, the strength of force, we see it in Myanmar, we see it already all over, militarized politics, and globalized economies. And at that level, the United States and China and the European Union are doing a dance together with a apparent conflict, but at a certain global level, a great deal of collaboration. These forces overlap even as they are often in competition or apparent competition with each other. Paradoxically, they are mutually dependent even as they are antagonistic. That is, they are mutually dependent, ideologized religion, militarized politics, and globalized economy. Against this world, in the spirit of Nehru, I propose a fourth world, a world of aesthetics. I propose that we make aesthetics a counterweight to religion, politics, and business along the lines of Nehru's moral force. Nehru's third world had a specific geographical location, the global South. Today's fourth world is a proportion of people everywhere with a majority nowhere, nowhere. I dare say probably that's as true in Morocco as it is in the United States, as it is in Germany, wherever. It is also part of every person, this fourth world, that part which rejects absolutism, deadly force, and for lack of a better term, ugliness. So this world of aesthetics I'm proposing, ugliness in the broadest sense of ugliness, whether ugliness of form or of purpose. What unites the new fourth world is a community of purpose, a mode of inquiry, the experimental and the avant-garde, if you will. The fourth world is at present incipient, not fully realized, seeds not yet wholly grown. This fourth world of aesthetics needs to organize itself as, quote, non-aligned, neither capitalist, whether of the US, European, or Chinese brand of capitalism, nor communist socialist, nor fundamentalist religious, whether Islamic, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, or whatever. The vanguard of this new fourth world are, and here I hope you won't think me too arrogant, performance theorists and performance artists who practice playing deeply as a way of finding and embodying new knowledge. Now, if I were to write a manifesto for this fourth world of performance, it would have 4 axioms. 1, to perform is to explore, to play, to experiment with new relationships. 2, to perform is to cross borders. These borders are not only geographical, but emotional, ideological, political, and personal. 3, to perform is to engage in lifelong active study, to grasp every possibility as a script, something to be played with, interpreted, reformed, remade. And 4, to perform is to become someone else and yourself at the same time. That is, to empathize, react, grow, and change. I realize that what I am proposing is almost unimaginable because it is so hard for people to take seriously those who are not doing business or not making war or not enforcing the will of God. But we must take seriously those who play, those who create playgrounds, those who create art spaces. We must take seriously the personal, social, and world-making force of performance. And I think that this conference, Khalid, that you and your colleagues have convened is an example of what I'm talking about. So that's my answer to your question about the broad spectrum, and as well this notion of the fourth world of performance. So ball's in your court.
Thank you so much, Richard. Yeah, it's so intense as always. My thinking about the third word of performance studies, you know,
I've changed it now. It has to be the fourth world.
Yeah, when I read the script, you know, written 3 years ago, as you told me, can we be the new third word? You know, it was so powerful, I must say. But now, definitely, I can see that, you know, it's closely related to, you know, the theorizing from the global south. So maybe, you know, I quote from, you know, the first script, you know, written 3 years ago, in, I think, page 22, you said, today, artists, activists, and scholars are the new third word. Nero's, you know, third word had a specific geographical location. Today's new third word is a proportion of people present everywhere with the majority nowhere. What unites the new third word is a community of purpose, and definitely, and a mode, I would add to that, a mode of becoming in Deleuzian terms. So I think here we are really speaking into the heart of what we are debating today, which is the global south. So we are thinking about the south, not really as a geographical location, but very much as, you know, I would say an option, a decolonial option maybe of, you know, providing other alternatives, other epistemologies from the global south that is not, as I emphasize, not really geographical. So when you mentioned the third point, which is about crossing borders, you reminded me also of the thinking across borders, which is another option, decolonial option proposed by Mignolo, you know, and also Walter Mignolo, and also by Adkbir Khatibi, who is Moroccan. And he labeled it as double critique, which is somehow, you know, thinking from the Western culture, but at the same time from the Arab-Islamic culture and from none of the two. And that's exactly another, let's say, epistemological disobedience. So do you see that this global South can be, somehow, invested in performance studies apart and away from, the age-old conversation about the hegemony of English, etc.
Right. Well, to not get too fancy about it, there remains, of course, an actual third or fourth world. In other words, of the world's 6 billion or 6.5 billion people, certainly more than half live in a social circumstance, economic circumstance, and a political circumstance that I would not want to live in. And I think one of our tests each of us has to ask is, would we really change places with this other person? And if we would not, what are the circumstances that prevent us from changing place with them? So I'll give you some personal examples. So I have very many close friends in China, and there is a Richard Schechner Center for Performance Studies in Shanghai. Am I about to move? And there's a study center there. Let's suppose, I'm not sure it's true, but let's suppose I could move to Shanghai and work there. Would I do it? And the question is, no, I would not at the present moment do it. And the reasons are complex. They're not material. They're largely questions of surveillance and control. At the same time, I'm very aware that I myself am being surveilled and controlled right in the United States. I've acquired from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, from the government, their file on Richard Schechner. I'm small potatoes, but there's a very thick file from that I'm able to get because of the Freedom of Information Act, of me being followed and this and that. Not as best I know at the present moment. Having reached the age of 87, they've kind of given up on me. But from the many years back, and they spent a lot of money looking after me, finding where I went, telephoning people and all. And this is if this is the surveillance that the American government, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Army Intelligence Agencies, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I know who the agencies are, all put such effort into me. Can you imagine the effort they put into Abby Hoffman or Malcolm X or people today who are active? So it's not a question of not moving. It's the devil I kind of know against the devil I don't know. But then there's a question: would I move, let's say, to Zaire? Or would I move to a village in India? And that would be a question. Permanently move? No. Why? Because of material circumstances. So very many people forgetting about ideology, forgetting about surveillance, simply because of material circumstances. People from certain places want to get to other places. I'm sure that most of the people who set sail in the Mediterranean Sea, even though they say they are setting sail for political asylum, are really setting sail for economic advantage. They want to live a better material life. They don't give a damn what the government does. And most people throughout most human history didn't give a damn what governments do, as long as they personally were not being oppressed, maybe their neighbor, maybe somebody down the road in another town, and that they had their proper shelter and food. I think we I won't talk for you. I think I, as a member of a certain elite, have to acknowledge this, that the sheer material circumstances are extraordinarily important and have to also drive our thinking. Now, what can performance do about that? So there's a range of performative activities, what Augusto Boal pioneered in his various forms of theater of the oppressed is one kind of thing, and that raises social circumstances. What playback theater and psychodrama does for mental health is another thing. And then the production of great stories, you know, whether they be Arabic stories or Old English stories or Hindu, you know, Sanskrit stories. These enrich the human imagination to perform them. They don't have any immediate social consequences. One of the things I really love about Bertolt Brecht is that his plays have a social dimension, but they're great dramas. You know, you read Mother Courage and Her Children, or you perform it. I mean, I directed it, and you get involved in Anna Fierling's life. It's everywhere as complex and interesting as Chekhov, and Chekhov doesn't have the same kind of political valence that Brecht does. But then I would say that if you get into Chekhov, there's no way that you can go into the heart of human emotions, depths, and actions and not be political. The political is the personal is the political. So it's a question then that we have as educators to make sure that our students, our adherents, understand those connections and promote those connections within and across cultures.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the personal is political, the private is public, and yeah, I mean, crossing the borders is one of the major questions. Maybe the third point will be, you know, what do you think about, you know, performance and the future of performance studies in the age of Corona and, of course, in the age of the pandemic?
Right. Well, Corona will be history in the sense that Corona will become like any number of other endemic diseases. In other words, malaria is always with us, has been. I mean, maybe we'll get rid of it, but it doesn't look like we're going to get rid of malaria very soon. In the third world, dysentery is always with us. In the first world, the influenza is always with us. So we should just realize that the pandemic, you know, part of the thing about COVID, it is a terrible disease, there's no doubt about it. But the fact that we have this global information network means that we're aware of it so instantly everywhere. So now we're Omicron, I think it's called, the new variant. There are 26 cases in South Africa. There's no doubt that it will spread because we are, you know, I'm laughing because the coronavirus is proof that we live in an intercultural world. We live in a world that's totally connected. If we didn't live in a totally, 500 years ago, the disease would be more or less localized. There weren't that amount, it would take longer. It wouldn't be localized, but it would take much longer. But the rapid spread, since it's spread from person to person, shows that people move about and there's no way to stop them moving about. So I think that the virus the world will somehow accommodate to it. I think global warming and the consequences of losing great territories, the consequences of desertification are, you know, in a certain sense, we're being distracted by the first course of the meal, and we're not really paying attention to what's coming. On the other side, what will it mean that people can farm in Antarctica? What will it mean that people will settle in Greenland? We don't really know how these things will play out. We don't know what technological situation will mitigate some of the warming. I do know that great art comes out of the consideration and sometimes the unusual consideration of the horrors that face us. So let me give two very obvious examples. Sometimes great art from which history has been drained. So I go to the Great Pyramid of Giza, and I've been privileged to have an actual private tour after it was closed to the pyramid, up the pyramid and all. And it's a fabulous structure. There's no doubt about it. but it was built by slave labor. So should it be taken down, just like the statue of Robert E. Lee was taken down from Richmond, Virginia, because he was the Confederate general who supported slavery? No, we should not take the great pyramid of Giza apart stone by stone. Yes, we should acknowledge that it was slave labor that built it. And yes, we should acknowledge probably most of us would not like to have lived in Pharaonic Egypt, given the circumstances of life for most of the people there. But these questions of how to separate the art from the circumstances which generated the art, from the individual lives of the artists, or the artists good people or bad people. I'm for a very nuanced and complicated take on that kind of thing. We have to examine the social circumstances, and we have to present to our colleagues and students what they were. At the same time, we have to appreciate the accomplishment and note that human beings are extraordinarily complex and contradictory creatures. You know, what we have in the cortex here has made us very hard to be made simple. And so, the other example I was going to give is Guernica, Picasso's great painting. I remember the painting of Guernica better than I remember the slaughter of civilians by fascist airplanes. That is the basis for Picasso having painted Guernica. What does that say about me? When I go to the Museum of Modern Art and look at the painting, am I immediately struck by the horror of, that painting came out? If I'm honest, no. I'm looking at the power of the painting. Similarly, if I look at El Greco, you could go down many artists. They're painting sometimes horrific scenes, Goya's Horrors of War, his paintings. And yet we look at these paintings for themselves also. And that's another complicating factor about art. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that. And we need to not constantly attack ourselves for being complex. We need to, I think, investigate our cultural complexity and to some degree celebrate it, even as we strive to make a more equitable and just society.
Thank you so much, Richard. When I asked the question, actually, I was also thinking about, the way Corona, for example, virus, during the lockdown, the whole industry of performance and performing arts in general, as an ecosystem, was crumbling down with the closing of theaters, with nobody in the streets, and the performances are not taken anywhere except online. This transformation, moving online, created a kind of conversation at least in the part of the world where we live, and people are no longer aware, or maybe are no longer happy with the confines and with the configurations of what is performance.
All right, I'll two answers to that. First of all, of course, this whole conference is a function of coronavirus and the lockdown. I would think that before there was coronavirus, more of us would be present in Morocco. It probably wouldn't be fully streamed. It wouldn't be on Zoom and so on. As you know, I myself was invited to come in person, and finally I decided not to come. The truth being, I was not fearful of what would happen to me possibly in Tangier, but I wanted to go to Marrakesh and to Fez and be in the markets and get close to people and breathe on them.
Definitely next year we do it. We do that next year.
I decided not to do that. So that was possibly a mistake, but it was my decision. I don't enjoy streaming performances anywhere near as much as I enjoy live performance, because for me, a large part of the performance experience is what the people next to me are doing, how they react, literally the body temperatures and their responses. I may be focused. Of course, my plays are usually environmental theater, so things are happening all over. But even if I'm in a proscenium theater and I may be focused on the picture frame stage, I am aware of the people next to me and their reactions. And that to me is at least 20 to 50% of the entire experience. You know, what is the depth? We all have been in a theater where the depth of the silence shows how much people are focused. We've all been in a theater where the laughter is contagious. We've all been in a theater where, you know, the shock of it is important. So you can't do this in streaming. To some degree, what we're doing now, and I look out here and I see Torsten Jost, I see Erika Fischer-Lichte, et cetera, and I see some names. We are all each in our silos. We're together, but we're apart. And it's good to be together at such distances. I don't know if Erika's in Berlin or wherever she is. Apparently she's not in Tangier. So I'm in New York. I'm in my daughter's bedroom, actually. I decided not to go. It's Saturday here. I didn't go to my workspace where I would have beautiful books like Erika has behind me. I've got a bed, but so we're in our separate places. Performance is a collective activity. Performance is a communal activity. Performance is of a piece with religion. Or in other words, religious ceremonies are great theatrical performances, and theatrical performances have been religious ceremonies. This is not true. This is true not only of Greece, it's true all over the world in any belief system. Let's not even call it religion. Any belief system I've encountered, whether it's a political belief system or a religious belief system or an aesthetic belief system, they are all performances. They all share great similarities, and they all demand co-presence to be truly effective. I think ultimately we will simply adjust. People will go, even if some get sick. Hopefully everybody will be inoculated and we will have it under control. But people go to the theater now with common colds. So it depends on what the death rate is. People, with various ailments attend theater, go to restaurants, walk in the streets. And I think, humans are, among other things, extraordinarily adaptable. And we learn to live with certain things. One of the paradoxes of COVID, of course, is that the infection rate in the third world seems to be much lower than in the so-called first world. Now, whether this is because there hasn't been enough testing or whether it's actual fact, there's been some data that says people who have been exposed to malaria are less likely to get COVID. The Indian subcontinent, South Asia, had a huge rise in cases, and now it's fallen to quite low. So we don't really understand the life of the virus at a social level. We understand the life of the virus at a genetic level, but we don't really understand it at a social level, and why certain parts of the world are less affected, whether they'll get it later or not. But at an information level, we know that whenever something happens, it is broadcast immediately. It not only goes out on the official channels, but it goes out onto YouTube, goes out onto Twitter, goes out onto Facebook, all the multiple ways we get information and disinformation, both. So I think finally we will live with it. We will have our theaters open. We will have our restaurants open, and we will take the consequences.
Thank you. Thank you.
What do you think? I mean, I wonder what some of the other people think. Am I being crazy here? Am I,
No, you're not. No, you are not. You are not. I think we think more or less in the same line. But it is, but I must admit, I think better we have this now. Just imagine, Richard, we haven't met for I do not know how many years, and now
yes,
at least
great.
I can see you here on this Zoom. So it has it's good things, and so far I think since we know we can now not travel, we have to do it that way, and I think human beings are that way. Then we can adjust to certain situations that are there.
Exactly.
And we have to do. And I
Right.
think people who sit there and lament, they
Absolutely.
will not make anything better.
Boccaccio wrote the Decameron. Boccaccio, in the middle of the Black Plague, wrote this great book. You know?
So let's now sit down us and we write the next book. So that's the opportunity. You
Yes.
say it. That's it. We do
Yes.
that, Richard.
At the same time, I want to come to Berlin soon and see you.
Yeah, that would have been very nice, but
Yes,
alas, it's not possible right now.
correct, correct. So what are some others? What are some of the people in Morocco and the Arab world? I see there are other participants, people who I don't know. What do you think of these things?
Hi, Richard. My name is Kene Egono, and I'm academic dean for arts and creative industries at Middlesex University, London. Just to say that I do share your views, by the way. I think that just like the common code, just like the flu that comes every year, I think we will have to learn to live with COVID. And already different countries are beginning to open. As you know, in the UK, where I live, the government has actually opened up the economy and taking out most of the rules. There is a clamor, there is a demand for some of those restrictions to come back, but I think that we just have to live with it. And theaters are opening already. I enjoyed a lovely performance a couple of weeks ago, and I think that's the new reality, unfortunately.
Yes, I'm about to travel to Paris. I'm going to see Ariane Manouchkine and the new Théâtre du Soleil, and my grandchildren who live in Paris, my son. So, you know, unless the government comes and says you can't travel, we're on our way on December 21st.
Yeah.
So what about this idea that I proposed and that Khalid read also from this third world, this idea of getting, I think we already have it to some degree. In other words, a majority nowhere, a minority everywhere, and inside each other, and using performance as a tool, not only for human knowledge and enjoyment, but as Horace said, you know, to educate and entertain. So educate is the kind of political aspect of it. I mean, it's what Brecht loved when he did his Lehrstücke, et cetera, and so forth. Do you think that's a good idea, a valuable idea, a terrible idea? I'm kind of interested in the response, because I wrote that essay and nobody responded to it. So, I mean, Khalid responded to it, but aside from that, I've gotten, that book has gotten responses, but not to that essay.
I think it's a really interesting concept, and I'm quite intrigued to hear you talk about a fourth world already, when we haven't quite lived the third world. I like the concept. If you really think of it, I mean, now we're talking about the global majority. In the UK, for example, in order trying to not talk from a white-centeredness, a kind of spaces, we are beginning to talk about, rather than this acronym BAME, Black Ethnic Minority Ethnic, that they use in the UK, we are beginning to talk about BIPOC. We're talking about Black, Indigenous people and people of culture. And we're also talking about the global majority, which is non-white, a different way of articulating that, what you've just described.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting that we can, perhaps societies around the world can come to the point when there isn't any one majority in places. I mean, I think already it's happening, but it's happening digitally. We don't have that yet in terms of the geographic spaces,
No.
but digitally, certainly, we're beginning to see a shift where there isn't any defined majorities anymore, but rather we have a mix of minorities.
Right,
but that raises a different problem, doesn't it?
I would like to agree with you and challenge the notion of, quote, minorities. In other words, you know, that assumes the presumption of a kind of European hegemony. For myself personally, being Jewish and having some of my family perish in the Holocaust, et cetera, I you know, when I enter in the US Census, it says enter race, I always enter other, but I enter it for two reasons. One, I'm Jewish, but secondly, you know, who knows? Genghis Khan and his forebears' genes are found in 8% of all Europeans. So, and race as a category, as a social category, it's enormously important. As a genetic category, it doesn't exist. So, and I would like to shift the rhetoric. So we talk about majority, and majority means the so-called non-white or whatever. I mean, it's very hard to talk without using these categories, but I try to think of constructions of race, constructions of gender, constructions of identity. And that's where, for me, the performance model is so important, the rehearsal model, the restoration of behavior model, the model that we're in the constant process of devising the realities in which we live. Or as Clifford Geertz, the great anthropologist, said, we live suspended in the webs of meaning we ourselves have spun. And I think that's an enormously powerful image or notion or idea, that we live amidst the realities that we're creating. And that is an aesthetic statement. That's a statement about aesthetics. You know, art is a kind of high ground of that way of thinking. And so is experimental science. In other words, part of what fascinates me about relativity, you know, in quantum physics and indeterminacy, I don't understand the mathematics, but I understand the concept that a thing is only real in relationship to something else, and or a multiple something else, that it exists at the intersection of energy fields that are a part of the physics of physical bodies, that there is a metaphysics, but it's not the metaphysics of religion. It's the metaphysics of quantum physics. So those are very exciting concepts that, you know, are 100 years old now, but they're just, you know, starting to edge out Newtonian thinking. So race thinking is Newtonian thinking, and the kind of thing you're talking about is quantum thinking.
Richard, can I ask you a rather controversial question, and perhaps provocative question, actually?
Please.
I think your notion of performance has actually given people like myself and a lot of scholars from Africa, I write mainly about West African theater, the language to articulate what already exists. And the question then is, does it necessarily then need to take a Richard Schechner to help the Global South understand the frameworks, or the framework that they already exist within their cultures, in order to articulate in a way that is understood by everyone, both in the global North and the South?
Well, you know, that is I once proposed a kind of a whimsical queen bee theory. The queen bee theory is that there are certain individuals in the hive that get fed by other things in the hive, and they become bigger. They're kind of elevated because they serve certain functions. In the beehive, the queen bee lays the eggs, et cetera, et cetera. But the queen bee is a, quote, ordinary bee who, for some reasons, I mean, I'm not an entomologist enough to know exactly what the biological things are, but an ordinary bee that is kind of, quote, selected to become the queen bee, and is then nurtured by the others and becomes the queen bee and serves this function of laying all these eggs. So to some degree, all of us who are leaders, Erica, me, Khalid, you know, in various ways, are to some degree within our world's queen bees. We of course have ideas, and we're individuated and smart, and to deny that is ridiculous. At the same time, we're not as smart as we're made out to be, and the ideas kind of percolate, and it's also a kind of like a crystal, like what forms a snowflake. It's a super cooled water and then a tiny bit of dust, and it all radiates out into this marvelous system. So, you know, I would not exist without Irving Goffman, without Victor Turner, without, you know, Claude Lévi-Strauss. I could name a whole bunch of people who had ideas that fed into mine, were like mine, preceded mine. Some of them I was, again, by accident or intent. I knew Irving Goffman. I worked very closely with Victor Turner. I slightly knew Clifford Geertz, but so these things occur. Now, if my thinking or the thinking attributed to me or the idea of performance studies, if I look in at Algiers and see the Fourja International Center of Performance Studies, of course I'm proud. But let me tell you, I was the person, I think, one of the first to use the word intercultural. And I know exactly where I got the word. I got the word while I was in the US Army in 1958. And I was stationed in Texas. And I had taken a trip from Fort Hood, Texas in Killeen to Austin to visit the University of Texas. I was very young. I was thinking of going to graduate school. I walked down a hallway and there was a window. I still see the window in my mind's eye. It said intercultural studies. I had no idea what it meant, intercultural studies, but I loved the word. And I took it, took it. And then later on used it in TDR. As far as performance studies came, the notion of performance, the word performance, I took it from Irving Goffman, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Chapter 2, Performances. And he defined performances, but it was broad, but still limited. It was the performances in everyday life, in normal life. And then there was a man that you probably don't know, Milton Singer, and he wrote a book called When Great Civilizations Modernize, I believe. And it's about the performances in what was then Madras, is now Chennai, India. And again, that was extraordinarily influential to me because he was talking about a whole cultural context. In other words, up until then in my education, I had learned about Aristotle, Shakespeare, it was very, very narrow. But my minor in college was philosophy and another one was psychology. So I was already interested in this stuff. And then when I found When a Great Civilization Modernizes, a kind of anthropological approach, and then Goffman and so on. So whatever happens because of a constellation of things. The whole idea of restoration of behaviors, there's nothing original. There's only new ways of reorganizing. But that is what knowledge is. Knowledge is taking the materials around one and seeing them and organizing them in a different way. So it's always a tension between what's discovered, that is what exists, and you come upon it and you literally uncover it, and what is created. In a certain sense, the myth of God is a great one. Only the creator creates. The rest of us discover.
Thank you, Richard, for that very generous answer. And I think it's that sense of generosity with which you've answered that actually comes through your work. And I just want to say, from my side, I think that's why I found it quite easy to adopt your performance theories and teach to students. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, we still have like 5 minutes, maybe 3 or 5. Maybe we have somebody from the back. If you can, أعطيها الميكروفون. أجل هنا. تفضل.
Good evening. So thank you very much for the extremely important presentation. I was listening with a lot of interest and care. Indeed, the use of the term the fourth world is very problematic, especially that we are today into the decolonial perspective on what it means to be located and probably epistemologically dislocated in the global south, where, the struggle, even in terms of scholarly communities, is for emancipation, that is, to get upgraded into the first world or probably the second position, then suddenly there is an act of, epistemically speaking, and I do understand that the postmodern is much more powerful in terms of creative thinking, in terms of epistemic thinking, and that's why probably the global South is now, from a postmodern perspective, downgraded into the fourth position. And that's, for me, goes against this shifting geography of reasoning into the global South, where the main question is freedom. So it's not only about texts and discourses and academics like us being sort of middle class, say whatever, critics or intellectuals, but it's also about geographies and spaces. How would you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think to some degree you misinterpret what I've said. The fourth world is the world of the artists. So, and the fourth world is both interior in everyone, some part of us, and a minority in all different kinds of societies. Let's say societies. Artists and intellectuals of a certain kind constitute the fourth world. I was using Nehru's model of the third world. He was proposing in a time when the world was, there was the Cold War, it was seen as a struggle between two superpowers, the USSR and the USA, and two systems of economics, capitalism and communism at that point. And he was saying, that's not the only alternative. You don't have to choose between a Twinkledum and Twinkledee. There is also this enormous resource, which he called the third world. I mean, it's his term, and then it was picked up, this enormous resource of what he said was, quote, moral authority. He meant it did not necessarily equal the military might of the USSR or the USA at that point, nor did it equal the economic strength of those countries, but it had a kind of moral authority in the depth of its civilizations in Africa and Asia especially. And I was picking up on that and saying that we as intellectuals and artists do not have the might in terms of economics, in terms of even usually administrative force that our governments and our militaries and our corporations have, but we have a, quote, moral authority in Nehru's sense, and I was saying that's an aesthetic authority. That's an authority to see the world and construct the world in different ways. And in this sense, we are not locatable either in New York or Nairobi or Delhi or anywhere, although we are present in all those places. And I was asking, and I think the very existence of this conference shows that you're ahead of me. And I mean, the essay is a few years old, but you've picked up on it, that this moral authority, this aesthetic authority, be formalized to some degree, as Nehru's third world was, and made operative. And then I specified certain qualities of performance. Those were the 4 points of my manifesto, which I won't repeat, but you can read them and so on, to mobilize that kind of thinking. I didn't intend, and I'm sorry if you understood, any kind of disrespect or denigration of people who are not living like I am in New York or have my privileges. I am, as respectful as I can. No one obviously is perfect, and we always make mistakes our most, if we have a good heart, as some of my Yaqui Indian friends would say, a good heart, our mistakes are unintentional, but they're mistakes nonetheless. And with people of good heart, the mistakes are often, you don't know you've made them. They're inadvertent. So if I've made any good heart mistake, I apologize for it. But what I intended was what I've just summarized.
Thank you so much, Richard. It was very clear, absolutely no mistakes about that. And when I quoted, from the third word of performance studies, definitely it resonates exactly with the thinking of the Global South. So definitely it's a different terminology and nothing else. So once again, I would like to thank you so much for being with us, and hopefully next year, definitely you should be here.
I certainly, I appreciate it, and I would, if it's at all possible, if I'm physically and mentally able, I will be there in Tangier next year, and
not only Tangier,
make a side trip to
sometimes
Berlin
with
to see
you, we
Erica.
promise, to take you around Tangier and Fez,
Terrific. Thank you. My
Thank you
regards
so
to
much.
all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks for Erica Fisher and for everybody. I think we have a performance now. So please join me to thank Professor Richard Schechner. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.